Hello, everybody. This is Jacob Sapochnik with the Enchanting Lawyer Podcast. This is a show where we interview the most inspiring entrepreneurs across the world and learn from them how to be better at what we do. Some of them are attorneys, some of them are not. And today we have a very, very innovative and exciting attorney. We past few shows we had non-attorneys that gave us very, very useful tips. And today we have Josh Brown. And Josh Brown is a practicing franchise attorney. Has built a legal practice around helping entrepreneurs build businesses that scale and grow. Josh loves helping entrepreneurs, business owners, franchisees, and franchisors build profitable businesses that reflect the owner's vision and provides value to customers. He speaks, blogs, writes articles, and is the creator and the host of Franchise Euphoria, a top-rated podcast on iTunes. Josh has also been recognized as a rising star in the Indiana legal community on 2 separate occasions, and most recently, a Franchise Legal Eagle by the Franchise Times. And he's just a great guy and a very, very innovative attorney. And Josh, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Wow, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much, Jacob. Thrilled to be here. Love what you're doing and really looking forward to chatting with you.
Thank you. And we just talked earlier, I didn't realize you're in Indiana, freezing over there. And here in San Diego, it's pretty warm. I can see the sun coming out. So I'm sending you and the listeners that are freezing some sun from wherever
we need lots of it. We need
that,
lots
right?
of it. Absolutely.
Excellent. So first of all, Josh, I am a big fan of your podcast as well and things that you do. And, I like to follow attorneys that do different things. One of the premises of the Enchanting Lawyer way is that you can't keep doing the same thing. And your story is so inspiring because you've just been out on your own for about 2 years now, and you've been doing so many different things. So before we jump into some of the interesting things we're going to talk about, why don't you tell us about your story briefly, why you decided to go on your own, become an attorney, and do what you do?
Yeah, sure. No, so I went sort of a non-traditional route when I graduated undergrad back in 1998. I worked for 5 years in business management, and part of what I did through that time was help a couple different franchise businesses start and grow from the business side of things. So after 5 years of working, I decided, I wanted to go to law school. So I go to law school, graduate, pass the bar. I did all sorts of different things in law school, participated on law review and moot court, and thought I wanted to be, just a full litigator. That was it. And part of that was a lot of people said, hey, I think you'd be really good in the courtroom, really good in front of a jury. And so, how you kind of get steered in directions. And so for the first a few years, that was back in 2006 when I graduated law school. And for the first few years, I practiced and did a lot of insurance defense work and worked for an appellate judge. And then had an opportunity in a firm that I was working with to really start developing my own business and my own clients. Right. And really after I remember getting a small business client by chance, and this was several years back. And I thought, wow, this is really cool getting to work with the actual entrepreneur, getting to work with the actual business owner, as opposed to with huge corporations where you really don't get that chance to really get to know the people behind the business. And I thought to myself at that time, I don't just want to be another small business attorney. There's thousands of them out there. So how can I differentiate myself? I mean, part of my background was in marketing. And so I thought, how can I utilize that? Well, I thought to myself, gee, let me look at the franchise market, right? I mean, let me look. I just didn't know of any franchise attorneys. I didn't know of any that marketed them that way in Indiana. So I started researching and I thought, holy cow, there's a lot of interesting legal issues in franchising. There's federal law, there's state laws, there's all sorts of regulations. And there really weren't a lot, I didn't know of any in Indiana that did so. So I said to myself, at that time, I said, the next cocktail party I go to or networking event I go to, when somebody asks me what I do, I'm going to say I'm a franchise attorney and just see what response I get. So I did that. And I was blown away. Instead of the typical response when you say, hey, I'm just a small business attorney, or it's like, oh, okay, that's cool. When I said I was a franchise attorney, everybody's like, really? That's so interesting. I wanted to buy a franchise at one point, or
Right.
I know somebody to introduce you to, or I need to connect you with so-and-so. And that has happened ever since. So I've made a lot of mistakes, right? As all of us have. But one of the smartest things that just by dumb luck that I did was I just made the decision, I'm going to just introduce myself as a franchise attorney before I had any franchise clients at that time.
Right.
And I didn't mislead anybody. If they asked, I said I was just getting into the field. But what I did after I realized this was a viable niche in the legal field is I started devouring all the materials on franchising, both from a legal perspective, the trade materials, trade publications, and just dove right in. Flash forward to today, and I've got a full practice based on in franchising. So that's really a summation of where I've come from to where I am now.
Right. And so, you in your mind, you set yourself that you will be the franchise attorney. Whatever happens, you will do that. And that's something that is pretty remarkable, because it takes a lot of courage to say that, even though you didn't know anything about that area of law, you wanted to be the guy doing this.
Yeah, and I didn't, at the time, I didn't, what I thought about that way was, I can learn it, right? And what I realized very quickly was, even when I was beginning, as I was reading more things, it wasn't that long before I started realizing I knew a lot more than a lot of the people I was talking to about the subject, right? And so when you know more than somebody you're talking to, you're thought of as the expert. But as we both know in the legal field and everything, I mean, we're continuing to learn each and every day. But yeah, I mean, I've always been the type of person that would go after it, right? I've never, when I've tried to go after things, I've never thought to myself, boy, I don't know anything about this. I've just thought, you know what, I'm just going to go after it and figure it out. And so far it's been pretty good.
Yes, and that's what I hear, and I see how you do well, and I congratulate you on that as well, Josh. Now, tell me, what do you think that going on your own was one of the best decisions you made? And I think it's an important point to discuss, because so many attorneys are listening right now, either debating or thinking that whether they should take the plunge, or why is it so beneficial, you think, for yourself and some of the things that others can learn from that?
Well, for years, I felt like a caged lion. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of attorneys listening, they might be nodding their head right about now, where they feel the same thing, where you sort of feel like you've got all sorts of things you want to do. You want to do it in your own voice, in your own way. But quite frankly, the legal profession and a lot of law firms hold you back, because there are a lot of attorneys that are not progressive in how they do things, are innovative, and they just want to continue to do things how they've always done them. And so I've always sort of felt like, even in my last stint at a law firm, where they wanted to, make me partner, and I had, my own clients and everything. This was before I went out on my own. Right. I just thought to myself, no, I want to do it differently. I wanted to, at the time when I was talking about doing blogging back then, and then also wanting to have a podcast that I didn't have at that time, but I have now, it was almost like, when you would tell some of these other attorneys in the firm that, they would give you these blank stares, like, what are you talking about? And I always, to a certain extent, felt like I was fighting an uphill battle. And I said to myself, the only thing that's preventing me from continuing to fight this uphill battle is myself, because I'm the one choosing to stay here, or I can just go give it a go. The thing that was holding me back for quite some time was, I have a family. My wife stays at home. At the time, we had one daughter. Now we have two daughters and a third on the way. But Jacob, I was just scared of failing. I mean, I was scared of all the things that everybody, right, is fearful of letting my family down, not being able to bring in money. And even though I had clients, I kept saying, oh, what if it dries up, and all that kind of stuff. And finally, my wife turned to me one day and she says, I cannot handle you complaining about all these things at the law firm. You either need to suck it up, or what I think you should do is go launch your own firm. I've got confidence in you. I know you're going to figure it out. go do it and quit worrying about it. And that was really the push that I needed to really get me to do it. Along with my dad told me at one point, he said, listen, he said, Josh, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? The worst thing is you go out, try to do it on your own and you fail, and then you go back and work for some law firm. That's really not that bad if you think about it in the grand scheme of things.
Excellent.
And I thought, that's exactly right.
And and most people feel that there's no coming back, and that's totally not true, because you try, it doesn't work, you can always go back and find a job. If you're a good attorney, why wouldn't you be able to find a job?
It's the whole mentality that I think in part law school puts into you, but it's this whole notion of win, 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 and it makes people fear fear failing. But what people don't realize is that if you go out and launch your own firm and you fail, you're actually going to be more viable to a law firm than you were prior. You're probably going to have some more clients, or at least some to bring to the table. But B, you'll have a better idea of what it's like to really run a practice, which a lot of law firms think of as an advantage for their attorneys. Now, for me, I'm afraid it may be a bit too late. I'm sure I don't know if I'd be able to go back to another firm unless I was forced to. And of course, that's not to say there's not a lot of great firms out there. But for myself, the one thing I've realized over doing this is all those thoughts that used to creep up on me when I was at a firm. Where, let me give you an example, because many people listening might be feeling this same thing. Right. That is, you're sitting in your office, you're doing work maybe that you enjoy. Right? And you're doing it and you're saying to yourself, why am I still not feeling satisfied? Well, I kept having that feeling, and I kept having those thoughts, and I kept saying to myself, this is a problem with me? Like, what's going on? Well, looking back at it now, those were just signs that I just needed to go do it my own way, because the dissatisfaction that I was feeling was because, again, I was feeling like that caged lion, where I just didn't want to have to go to the managing partner or go through this committee to see about doing this on my blog, or to see about doing this on my podcast, or to see about doing this differently. That was really bringing me down. And I realize now that those were all great signs that I just ignored, quite frankly, that would say, hey, you just need to go do your own thing. And I think there's a lot of attorneys out there right now who are feeling the exact same way. They're feeling the fear. Yeah, and they're asking themselves, why am I dissatisfied when I'm doing good work? I enjoy the work I'm doing, but something is just not completing this picture. And that's what I figured out for myself that it is. And so once I was able to free myself, it was sort of like, oh my gosh, now I can do everything that I've wanted to do. And so that was just a phenomenal feeling.
And I'm listening to you right now, and I'm thinking, well, that was me 11 years ago, and the same feelings. So those little feelings, they're not there for no reason. There's a reason why they kind of jog your interest to do something different. Whether you're going to work or not, doesn't matter. You have to try.
Yeah, you have to try it. And, it just, I just told myself I was never going to be, ultimately, I didn't know when I was going to go out on my own. I was certainly fearful. But I always still, in the back of my mind, said, I do not want to be one of those miserable people that's been practicing for 30-some years. And we all as attorneys know them. And you look at them, you go, wow, they've been successful, they've done well, this and that, but they just seem like they're miserable. And I think they're miserable because they probably wanted to do things a little bit differently, but they never got around to doing it. And I never wanted to be in that position.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. That should be a quote. And Josh, I want to go over a few things that you wrote about a few months ago, talking about some of the most useful, important lessons that you've learned so far, being out for 2 years when you start your own firm. So first thing you talked about was don't buy the hype, talking about the app crazy, buying the equipment. Why don't you tell us about that? What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so when I first launched, and even a little bit prior to that, I mean, I was obviously getting involved in online strategies or in online ways in which, how could I set up my practice to where obviously I don't have the overhead of a regular firm. And so I'm utilizing a lot of apps, a lot of technologies. What the mistake I made is that I bought into a lot of different ones, and it became overwhelming because of that. Like I was trying to have, oh, this app is going to help me with this, with scheduling, and then this app is going to do this, and this app is going to do this. And finally, I realized, A, not all of them work that well together. B, there's a lot of hype around it for some of these where it's overplayed and where you really don't need them. And C, when you're just getting started, it's sort of like any kind of business. There's the notion of a minimal viable product. I think as a law firm, you need to have your minimal viable practice. And in doing that, I mean, I spent thousands of dollars on stuff that I look back now at, Jacob, and I go, I didn't get any benefit from that. Right? I mean, thousands of dollars on stuff and where it's like either maybe it wasn't a bad product, but I wasn't at the stage for it. In other words, there's lots. And, let me give you an example.
Give an example, yeah.
I spent, what was it? It was, well, one example was Infusionsoft. I don't know if you use Infusionsoft or know Infusionsoft.
I use it. We started using it 6 months ago. And I'll talk about the Infusionsoft in a second, but I want to hear what you have to say. Yeah,
so I think it's a great product. I think for when I tried to use it and what I tried to do, it was way early, and it didn't work out. And I spent thousands of dollars on that, both getting that set up and everything. But it was because I was too early to it. I tried to use Salesforce in terms of a CRM for the client relationship management and all that kind of stuff. Because I have tried, Rocket Lawyer and some of these others, Rocket Matter. And I was looking for something that was more complete, that wasn't just related to the legal side, because I'm getting, was getting business leads and how can I manage all that stuff. Well, that ended up just being way too much for me as well. The other mistake I made was I thought, gosh, I need to find a virtual assistant right away. And I went to a company that I won't name, but let's just say I spent $5,000 to $6,000 going through this company to get a VA. And it was a total letdown. The VAs I was getting that were supposed to be a good, experienced VAs ended up not knowing how to do anything. And a lesson I learned there was you can't rely on you have to really have a clear picture of what you want a virtual assistant to do. But I spent thousands of dollars on that. I've had a VA since that I now work with who's fantastic, but I found her through somebody that I knew, and it's an individual person. So I say all these things because I wanted to take over the world when I launched my practice. And I was like, okay, I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. And what I really realized at the end of the day was, in order to be successful, you don't have to do all those things. You really have to hone in on the key components. And the key components are, can you set up a system that is free or very, very inexpensive and be able to take care of your clients, be able to track your leads, and be able to keep your files and everything organized? That's all you really need. And I was getting ahead of myself. Part of it was because I was so excited, and part of it, quite frankly, was just because I was naive.
Right.
And bought into the hype. So getting back to the original question, that's where I'm saying buying into the hype.
And I think this is an important point to start with, because there's so many things out there, especially when we start. There's so many articles, so many promotion. People promote things that are, people that we follow. And like you said, sometimes you don't need all this. You have to wait for the calling from inside your business. Now the law firm is growing, and now you can't track your leads anymore. So what are we going to do now? Then you start testing what is out there. You get too many people that need to be attended, so now you need an assistant. So you have to be ready for when you cross. You see what I mean?
Absolutely.
So, and just one word about Infusionsoft. I think it's a great product. It is a very complicated product, and I think that it's being used for when you have that many leads that you develop a system to automate all that. And you know what you're doing with each one of these leads, and you use all their features, which is follow-up, automation, then I think it's worth it. You have to have a sizable list to be able to use all the benefits of that tool. And I think it's a great tool. Most attorneys that are using any software to track or follow-up eventually should be transitioning to Infusionsoft. and you'll know when time comes. But in my case, it's been very useful because we're getting leads from so many different
Sure.
sources, and so it's impossible to not track and follow up with them if you don't have something robust enough to be able to if you work on funnels of PPC, or if it's Facebook or Twitter, or Instagram, or people calling the office, or even people who walk in. We track everything to the bone using Infusionsoft. So at that point it's useful. But there's so many other tools that you can transition to Infusionsoft by much cheaper when you're ready.
And at the time, and that's exactly right, and that's a great point, because at the time I used it, what I wish they would have said, and I was very clear when I talked to them, I said, listen, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm doing. I said, are you sure Infusionsoft is not overkill? And they were pretty certain that it wasn't. And then I realized pretty quickly, although it took, it did take, I spent some money on it. Yeah, a few thousand. That it wasn't. And finally, I got somebody there to admit to me, one of the guys who was helping with, he said, listen, the reality is, unless you have X number of leads already, there's so many other apps that'll work better for you. And you don't need. So that's the kind of thing about buying the hype, is you have to be very careful. I mean, look, you and I and many other people, we love the online space. We love the technology. I love all that aspect of it. But you can't just go look up some reviews online and then go buy it, because a lot of times you'll be dissatisfied. I've done that so many different ways. Now I run more of a filter. I try to find at least one or two other people who have actually used it, and I get really detailed feedback as it pertains to my law firm before I go and invest in something like that.
That's perfect advice. Let's talk about accounting right now. This is a scary word for many attorneys. And I think you have a good input on that, why it's important, and why don't you tell us about this?
So accounting, of course, me as a franchise attorney and working to help people set up their businesses, I've always valued the accounting piece of it. But then going and launching your business is a very different thing. So in my first year when I launched, I was using a product called FreshBooks, which I loved, actually. It was very simple, and it was great for invoicing and everything. I was also trying to use QuickBooks. And there were aspects of QuickBooks I liked, but I thought it was overly complicated for what I was trying to do. And I was actually trying to use both of them together. And what happened at the end of the year was my books were not in as good a shape as I had thought or how I wanted them to be. So there were two problems with that. The first problem was I was trying to do it myself. That's A. B was I was trying to combine two different things and make them work together when they really weren't meant to work together. And it was difficult for my accountant to then look at everything and piece it all together. So it cost me a heck of a lot more money for my taxes. It cost me a heck of a lot of time. I spent weeks of time trying to piece all this stuff together at the end of the first year. And then I finally realized I have got to make a change. And so I found this. Actually, this company found me, but it's a company called Kahuna Accounting, Kahuna. Awesome company that I've been using ever since, where they specialize in working with law firms, small law firms. And they essentially use a software called Xero, Xero, that's a competitor to QuickBooks. But what you do is you pay them a flat monthly fee. It's $150 a month, I think. It may have gone up, but that's what I pay, $150 a month. And you get a dedicated accountant who does your books. You tie in your bank account, you tie in your receipts and everything. And I have somebody who I can call up, and I regularly do, to ask questions about how should I expense this, where should it go. But then she takes it all and organizes it. And then at the end of the year, I get a packet with all of my itemized expenses, my income reports, balance sheets, all that kind of stuff that I can just take and hand over to my CPA. Mm-hmm. Wow, I'm serious, what a great company. And so that's where you go from an example of a disaster in accounting to an example of figuring out what the problem was and saying, I've got to take myself out of the equation, and I've got to make sure that whoever is doing it, that I'm in communication with and overseeing. And for me, Kahuna Accounting has been has been fantastic.
Excellent. We'll put a link in the show notes. Sounds like a great tool, and they can do it in any state, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, they operate. In fact, they're out of Illinois, but
Okay.
they work with companies all over the country.
Very good. That's a great tip. Let's talk about we touched outsourcing briefly. You talked about receptionists and your virtual assistants. I'm curious to know why you decided to go with outsourcing as opposed to many other attorneys who are looking to hire some cheap labor on site. And tell me the benefits of working with. How do we work with somebody who's not in your office?
Well, it can be challenging. I will say that I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But what happened was I had that bad experience with the VA, which really left a bad taste in my mouth. And I was actually looking to bring somebody in. And I had somebody who was working with me, and they were good with certain things, but didn't really get the whole online thing. And so I started. I was doing some work with Jamie Tardy. In one of her businesses, and one of her VAs was actually working with me, and she said, at some time she said, "Look, my project with Jamie's ending. I just want to say it's been great working with you, and I'm going to go do X, Y, and Z." And I thought to myself, I know this person. I've worked with her, so I know she's good. I know, I've gotten to know her. So I said, "Well, are you still interested in doing, some of the VA work?" And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" And so that's how I found my current VA.
Right.
Was I had worked with her through Jamie, and then she's been working with me ever since. So, but in terms of the challenges, right? You're never. I'm fully convinced a virtual assistant can never fully replace somebody in your office, because when things come up, and if somebody was in my office, I could just hand them off.
Sure.
It's always a question of, well, I can't hand it off. Is it going to take more time for me to, email this, explain what needs to be done, or should I just do this or have one of my associates do it? So there's never the full one-to-one comparison. But I have gotten in my virtual assistant. I have such a good relationship, and she understands, my likes, dislikes, all that kind of stuff. And she has completely taken over the editing and the work on my podcast. She automates a lot of my content. Now I still create the content, but I've even empowered her to now create some content based on my old content. So as an example, she'll go through, listen to some of my podcasts, right, and then take that and create blog posts from that content that then will turn into blog posts. She does all of this was huge for me, Jacob. I don't know if you use a VA for this or not, but after I misscheduled about 2 or 3 appointments because I wasn't very good apparently in getting the right dates and times on the calendar, I said, I am no longer doing this. So I literally, when anybody reaches out and wants to connect, whether it's for coffee or for a phone call or anything, and well, you experienced this,
Absolutely,
right, with the podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
I said, looking forward to it. I'm going to CC my assistant. She'll get everything coordinated. I turned over my calendar to my VA, and that has been huge, because now she schedules everything for me. I don't spend the time that we all know going back and forth, right? With, okay, does this date work? Does that date work? But I do it in a way, or at least I try to do it in a way to where it doesn't feel like I'm doing it because I feel like, oh, I'm so important, I can't be doing that, because that's not the case. It's just more about efficiency. Right. And I think it's more efficient for both parties when I say to my VA, okay, hey, just coordinate this date, and then she'll reach out to the person and say, hey, do these dates work for you, or what days do work for you? And she'll get everything set up. That has been a huge benefit for me. I also utilize her with new clients, and setting up engagement letters and other sorts of stuff. So as you can tell, a lot of the things I'm doing with her are things that are easy to do from a long distance relationship. Right. And so she's in Maine and I'm in Indiana. We've never met in person, although I feel like I know her really, really well. And she's been working for me now for, I don't even know, 1.5 years or so, maybe a little bit longer.
I like that example because, sometimes you can't find local people that can do stuff for you. And, reaching out, you may be surprised what you can find.
Absolutely, and it just all depends on what you're doing, what you're looking for. My advice on virtual assistants and outsourcing is be as specific as possible for what you're looking for, and don't expect somebody to come in and set up your systems for you. They may ultimately be able to do that, but that's going to come after they know you a little bit. But if you can be very specific and say, okay, these are the exact tasks I'm looking for, you're going to have a much better chance of having a successful relationship.
Excellent. And then one thing that I wanted to ask you, Josh, and from the points that you wrote before, is treating your clients like royalty. And I wanted to touch on that before we talk quickly about podcasting. How do you wow your clients?
Well, one of the things I try to do is do things that are different from a lot of attorneys. So like there's a lot of attorneys out there, and a lot of anybody who's had experience, business people who've had experience with attorneys, there's this whole notion that they try to bill for every single communication. Well, I just don't do that. I try to show them value. I try to, when they don't have a problem, I reach out and see how things are going. One of the things I've started to do, which has been really, really, they at least appreciate, is, instead of sending them chocolates or whatever around the holidays, at the new year, I send all of them my favorite book from the past year that has to do with business or franchising, and I with a nice letter, and I buy it for them, and I mail it, ship it to them, and I say, listen, I don't know if you've read this or not read this. If you haven't read it, it'll be, I think, great for your business. If you have, please just pass it forward. Pass it on to somebody else who you think it would be a benefit for. All these things in the mind of a client make them think, wow, he's really interested in what I'm doing, because I am. And that's what I mean when I say, when you treat people like royalty, I try to return calls quickly. I try to take care with what they do, go the extra step. And then also, I think in just being a small business owner myself, I think that's of great value for what they look for in their attorney.
Excellent. I like this tip, and I think that, again, this is something that shows them he took the time to buy the book, put the note and send it to me, and people will feel special. They never forget that.
Absolutely.
And then, Josh, tell me real quick about podcasting, why you do it, and how it changed your business.
Well, I first really got interested in podcasting a few years ago, and then I started really listening to John Lee Dumas on Entrepreneur on Fire and a bunch of other business-related podcasts. And I said to myself, I really want to do that. And part of it was I loved the medium. The other part of it was I didn't know any other attorney who was doing it in Indiana. And so I actually found out that I'm the only, I may not still be, but I was the only attorney in Indiana that actually had his own podcast. But what I love about it, beyond all those things, is what a great way to provide value for your target market. So often, people, they may not right here and now need your services, but maybe a month or 2 months from now they will. If you have a vehicle like a podcast, like with my podcast, I interview people about franchising. I sometimes have my own franchise tips of the day where I go on and talk about what I think are interesting aspects of it. But essentially, you're providing valuable, free content to people. And what I did not expect was how much it was going to connect me with people all over the country and beyond. I mean, I have received a number of new clients from it, people who have called me from all sorts of many of the states across the country and beyond. And even beyond that, people who have connected me to other people because they've listened to the podcast. And I remember one time, wasn't too long ago, where a guy called me from Alabama, and he was asking me about. He said, "Hey, I need help to review a franchise agreement and everything." So I'm sitting here talking to him, Jacob, saying, "Okay, let me tell you about myself." And he goes, "I already know all about you. I've been listening to your podcast." So it was like I didn't even have to tell him anything about me.
Oh, I love that.
Oh, isn't that great? And then somebody called
Yeah.
me, where was it, from Mississippi a couple weeks ago, who was looking to buy a franchise and said, I've listened to each one of your episodes, really love the value. I have a couple questions. These are all things that I guess in the back of my mind I thought were possible, but I didn't really know that would happen. But it's also, and this is another thing I did not even think about when I launched it. It has been a great way to introduce myself to a lot of other entrepreneurs and business people. And rather than, because I have them on my show. I mean, I've met so many people here locally, and part of my way to get to know them is sometimes you go meet for coffee and everything like that, but it's also, hey, why don't you come on my show? And they're like, your show? What are you talking about? And so you start telling them about the podcast and whatever, and they start going, oh, that's kind of cool. And so they come on. So it's been a great way for me to meet other entrepreneurs, other franchise owners, other business owners, business people, other people who work with franchises, all sorts of people. I think you and I both have a great mutual respect for Michael Gerber from the E-Myth, and I was able to interview him on my show. And people say, "Well, how did you get him on your show?" And I said, "Well, I just reached out and asked. I mean, that was it. All I did was reach out and ask." So it really gives you an open opportunity in this day and age to expand your network, and it's done more faster for me to be able to expand my network than I could have ever imagined. I'm always trying to get people to consider podcasting, but people think it's so difficult to do. It's really not once you get going with it.
I agree. And just listening to you here, Josh, I get inspired double just listening to this, and hopefully others feel the same. So why don't you share with our listeners where they can find you online, and I'll make sure to link that in our show notes as well.
Sure. You can always find me at indyfranchiselaw.com, and that's INDY franchiselaw.com. My podcast is called Franchise Euphoria. It's on iTunes and Stitcher and all the major platforms. And feel free, anybody who wants to reach out to me, you can email me at josh@indyfranchiselaw.com. And if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, right, you can call me too. You can call me at area code 317-688-9111. So between those ways, I think you can definitely get a hold of me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Josh, for coming on the show, and I wish you all the best. And
thank you, Jacob. I keep doing what you're doing, by the way. I love what you're doing. I'm really enjoying getting to know you. And you everything that you've been able to build and continue to grow, and the things not only that you're doing with your podcast, but with your business. I mean, it's really an inspiration to me, and I think a lot of other people. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Josh. And this is Jacob at enchantinglawyer.com. If you have any questions, you can email me, leave us a comment, and we'll see you at our next episode. Thank you very much.